Hello again. In our last video, we discovered that the distance formula comes directly from the Pythagorean theorem. That's where the distance formula comes from. So we used d equals the square root of parentheses x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. Okay. And again, that is called the distance formula. Okay. That is called the distance formula. Now we are going to work with negative coordinates. Okay. Negative coordinates can be very difficult because this is where sign errors commonly occur. So I want to write the second example that we're going to look at, example number 2, and we're going to find the distance between a parentheses -2, 3 and b parentheses 4, -5. All right, so the first thing we need to do is identify our coordinates. So we have here established, we have, let's say, as a matter of fact, let's let x sub 1 and y sub 1 equal point A. We'll make it -2, 3. And then we're going to also allow x sub 2 and y sub 2 to equal 4, -5. Now, we have to substitute these values directly into the distance formula. So I'm going to write the distance formula, d equals, and I'm going to substitute those values into this particular formula. So again, I'm just going to use this up here for reference. X sub 2 is 4. X sub 1 is minus a -2 squared. And I'm going to add, I have to extend this out a little bit. I'm going to have to add the -5, right? Which is y sub 2 minus 3 squared. Okay. So this is how you write it. So x sub 2 is here. X sub 2 is +4. And the distance formula is subtracting. So I'm subtracting this, and I'm subtracting it from a -2, which is x sub 1. Okay, so that's why we have two subtraction symbols right here, and it's separated by parentheses. Now we have to slow this down because we have to notice that our first subtraction is 4 minus a -2. So subtracting a negative becomes addition. So this tells us that we need to add. So when you have two minus signs, think of it as opposites becoming positive, right? So 4 minus a -2 is actually 6. Okay. So again, this becomes addition here. All right. When you see two minus signs together, they become addition. So we add that. Our second subtraction here is -5 minus 3. So when you have a -5 minus 3, this is called the additive inverse. So what you actually have to do is take the -5. As a matter of fact, let me write the first one over here. So we have 4 minus a -2. This becomes 4 plus 2. which is 6. And then we have negative 5 minus 3, which becomes negative 5 plus negative 3, which equals negative 8. Okay. So this here, I'm going to end up adding a negative 8 squared instead of the alternative. All right. So now doing this, we can compute it. We have the square root of 6 squared, or 6 squared plus negative 8 squared. So 6 squared is 6 times 6, not 6 times 2, 6 times 6, which gives us 36. Then we have negative 8 times negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 8 is going to give us a positive 64. So again, this 6 squared is 6 times 6, which is 36. And then negative 8 squared is negative 8 times negative 8, which is positive 64. For continuing on, when we add those values together, we end up with 100. 100 is a perfect square. So this simplifies to 10 because 10 squared is 100, right? So therefore, the distance between the 2 points that we have here located, A, B, is 10 units. 10 units is the distance between these 2 points. So the most important thing to notice here is that negative coordinates do not make the distance negative. Distance represents a length, so it can never be negative, okay? Distance cannot be negative. Also notice that when we squared this guy, the negative 8 squared, it resulted in a positive 64. So the result is positive. Now, let's look at a very common mistake, because common errors happen all the time, even for professors sometimes. So a student writes 4 minus a negative 2, and they say, oh, that's 2. Well, is that correct? Obviously, no. Subtracting a negative means adding its opposite. So when we see 4 minus a minus 2, you have to add the opposite, which is why I ended up adding the 2 and not subtracting the 2. And this is why parentheses are extremely important when substituting a negative. So do not rush through substitution. You have to write the negative value inside parentheses first and then simplify. So again, the correct way to do that is adding the 2 rather than subtracting the 2. So remember these 3 things. First, substitute negative coordinates into parentheses, like we did here. Second, simplify the subtraction carefully over here. And then third, the distance cannot be negative. So notice how anytime you square a number, you're going to end up with a positive value, right? That's how it's going to work. Now, in our next video, we will introduce the midpoint formula and learn how to find the exact point halfway between 2 coordinates. Thanks for watching.